My name is PAVLINA YANKIEVA. I am a founding partner at Oscar Growth Partners, a consulting company here in Silicon Valley. Originally from Bulgaria, born and raised. Have lived here for 23 years. I'm going to be moderating the panel today, and we'll be talking about, we have a great lineup of presenters. We're going to talk about what does it take to build a successful ecosystem for aspiring entrepreneurs globally, and how do we set up those aspiring entrepreneurs for success in the U.S. or other global markets. So to start the discussion, I just wanted to introduce some of the panelists today. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes, great. A very good audience. I like that. Everybody's listening. Thank you. So we're going to start a little bit out of order. If you have the agenda in front of you, since I have my partner next to me, partner for this discussion, Geoff Burke. He's a marketing director at a company called Calix. And what we'll do today is we're going to talk about some of the specifics as related to building the successful ecosystem for these global entrepreneurs. Some of you here fit in that profile. And I'm going to ask them some questions. They're going to introduce themselves and share some background information. And then if we have time, because we have 1 hour before everybody steps out for lunch, we'll take questions from the audience. So without further ado, Geoff has been representing and working for a company that some of you might have been familiar in Armenia. Calix, it's a partner for one of the broadband infrastructure companies, UCOM, in Armenia, I'm sorry. And what I would like to do is, I would like to let you watch this brief presentation. It's a presentation on Calif and UCOM's partnership in Armenia.
Actually, why don't we start with the PowerPoint, and then I'll jump into that in just a second. Let me do a quick introduction as to who we are and why I'm here, Great. And then I'll jump right back. Hi, everybody. My name is Geoff Burke. I run corporate marketing at Calix. We're based up actually in Petaluma, California, but we also have large offices down here just off of 237 in San Jose, as well as a number of places around the world. And you may wonder, why are we here talking about startups and connecting global markets as a company that is, publicly traded. We're on the NYSE. We do about $500 million a year in revenue. We're in about 100 countries around the world. But the reality of this is twofold. One is that a key component of this presentation session is about connecting, right? And that is what we do. We are infrastructure builders. We connect things. We make the fiber and copper infrastructure, and oftentimes Wi-Fi infrastructure that exists and builds out countries around the world, and also is becoming a very key component to the foundation that's actually of infrastructures being deployed throughout Armenia. I'm going to show you some examples of that in a few minutes. And then in addition to that, we're also up here because we have actually one of our most innovative customers. Is a company called UCOM, based in Armenia. Many of you may know them from your dealings in the country, but we actually issued them an innovation award on behalf of our over 1,300 customers in the last year or so. And I was going to take a second today to play a video just to show you some of the things they are actually doing in country to give you an example of how that works. Let me also point out that as a company, one of the other reasons we're up here is because even though we are relatively large and distributed around the world, we also have to view ourselves as a startup, right? As I know that many of you who are involved in big business realize is that as this world has become more and more competitive and innovation becomes more and more of an imperative for everyone, you have to be thinking in this way, waking up every morning and thinking how you're going to, where you're going to innovate, where you're going to interact. And ultimately, even though we're a company that was founded 16 years ago, as we've grown and acquired new startups, as we've grown, it actually reinvigorates that startup mentality. And of course, we were actually just received one of the largest awards you can receive in our industry just a couple of weeks ago, actually in Austin. And I think that as a company, we celebrated for about 30 minutes and then went right back to work trying to figure out where we can innovate next. And I think for those of you who are involved with startups, it's pretty indicative of the type of mentality you have to have. So what do we do again? We are an access infrastructure provider, and we actually believe that we are entering a period of what we're calling broadband unbound, which is the removal of the access constraints that exist in networks. And to us, the network actually starts at the cloud and well, it actually starts with the device and it ends at the cloud, right? And that connectivity in between. And ultimately what it results in is when the constraints are removed in that environment, you basically have the foundation for innovation, you have the foundation for inspiration, right? And you have the makings of a great foundation for startups in their environments. Let me give you an example of how this has actually worked in the US for us. Many of you may be familiar with a company called CenturyLink. They're about the third largest telco in the US, and we actually started working with them when they were really a startup. They were only tens of thousands of lines, and as they've grown along with us, they started actually building a gigabit infrastructure even about 15 or 16 years ago when they first started working with us. And today, if you live in Las Vegas or Seattle or Minneapolis or Orlando, you actually have this infrastructure in place now in which not only are they receiving, as a subscriber just residentially, can you receive a gigabit service, but of course there are incubators throughout these cities that they have now sponsored that build upon this gigabit infrastructure to actually drive this drive additional success and ultimately put those areas in a position to be real I guess, fountains of innovation for those startups. And the same sort of thing is actually happening in Armenia today with one of our customers called UCOM. And what I wanted to do is actually take a moment and actually click on a video we have here that is a summary of what they are up to. And I think it'll give you a good sense of what's happening.
My name is Alexander Yasan. I'm co-founder of company UCOM. We established the company in 2009. That year there was really terrible situations in terms of development of telecom infrastructure in Armenia. There was old networks, copper networks, and even ADSL service was not available on that line. So when we were starting the project, we decided to go directly to GPON technology, fiber to the home, with 1 gigabit per second access. We believed that we need to develop the internet in Armenia, and we believe that we can have success there. And today, UCOM having one of the largest networks in Armenia, having fiber to the home infrastructure, pure GPON technology, and in 2009, at the same year, we also started first IPTV service in the region.
UCOM is covering around 50% of houses, passed already houses in Armenia, around 300K. And within 1 year, we have passed more 100,000 houses. It's coming 33% of growth, what we will expect in 2015. From 2009, we start building this network with the Ericsson equipment, BLM. Now we are switching to Calix E7 series. Why we are doing this? Because we have also with the residential sector, we have around 2,000 subscribers of business customers. And we want to get with E7 series, we can give more comfortable and more high advanced services for our network.
As an international school, we need we need to organize a lot of teacher, parent, and student conferences, and we have a lot of international connections. So 2 months ago, we had internet connection of 2 megabytes per second, and it wasn't enough for our programs. And in cooperation with UCOM company, we have 20 megabytes per second internet connection with fiber optic and the second backup line with the same capability.
partnering with colleagues, today we can realize that having this equipment on our network will allow us easily to start also new service on LTE base stations with having backbone for base stations. So we plan from next year also to have LTE service, which will allow us to be the first operator, 4-play operator in Armenia.
You see here we have a lot of books just for our patrons, but we are happy with cooperation with UCOM company because we all understand that now the world is moving to the digital era. The libraries also, we are building digital library modules, and one of the biggest challenges of this time is to have as much services as possible in digital formats. So UCOM suggested us as a social action, as a goodwill, just to bring free internet to the library. And thanks to them, in all reading halls of the library, in all premises of the library, we are having free access to the internet.
Theme that we had from the beginning was the key for our success in the market. Today, being Armenian company, we are not only able to compete with big telecom operators like Orange France Telecom, MTS, Beeline, Vimpelcom, but also are able to win the market.
So with that, I just wanted to congratulate UCOM. He had, as you may have seen, we actually showed that interview at our user group about a year and a half or so ago, and since then they actually have acquired Orange as they acquired Orange as an operator and continue to grow throughout the country. And in fact, are rolling out things like vOffice around the country that allow basically a great infrastructure for startups around there, and for us, a great beacon of how companies can grow and live and thrive with deploying fiber around the whole region. So with that, I wanted to just cite, Chief Foon had originally pointed out how impressed he had been with the increase in infrastructure around Armenia since he'd been visiting. And this is one area that we believe is just fundamental to startup success. If you don't have that broadband infrastructure in place, a gigabit capable infrastructure, you're challenged. And if you do, you're actually in a position to compete with anybody in the world. So with that, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing this incredible success story. As we mentioned, some of the members of the audience are probably very familiar with UCOM and Calix as a company. So what lessons learned came from being in Armenia or working with the local the local government or the local entrepreneurs? How does it feel? How did it feel at the end to be one of the enablers of success for the economic development of the country? Sure. Well, obviously, it feels great to be part of something that is so key to growth and laying a nice foundation. As far as working with the locals, we have just found UCOM and everyone we work with to be extraordinarily just energetic and have a future vision. I mean, I think the reality of this is that oftentimes we, as I said, we're in hundreds of countries around the world, and very few of them are actually able to look at themselves with a bit of a clean slate, okay, and say, and a long-term view, and say, if we actually take that leapfrog, invest in technologies that will allow us to basically have an unlimited future, because that's what fiber is. It's an unlimited waveguide, right? It ultimately puts you in a position to be, extraordinarily competitive and advantaged anywhere you compete in the world. And from what we've seen, Armenia has been just a beacon of that for us regionally. And I've used UCOM as an example in speaking to operators around the United States. I've used them in other countries around the world because these same issues are actually felt
Even here in the Silicon Valley, many of you don't have access to a gigabit infrastructure, right? These guys pretty much did it on their own. They went out there, they saw the vision, they invested, and they're now reaping the benefits of it. They see people coming to them because they want to have this level of service, and the world's actually catching up to the infrastructure that they've laid.
Great. Well, I'm sure the locals, as far as the community, the government, and everybody else is very grateful of that partnership, and it sounds like it's been a very successful endeavor. So thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing the presentation and the video on Calyx, and wish you success.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. Thank you.
Absolutely. Before we continue on, I want to remind those of you who are on mobile devices, or pictures or favorite, tweets, things that you've heard throughout the day. The Twitter handle is Armenia IT Forum on Twitter, and yeah, that'll be awesome. Thank you. So we just talked about what does it take to support the infrastructure, or what does it take to support the ecosystem in Armenia? Well, another key success factor, other than infrastructure and government policy, is obviously the entrepreneurial culture, fostering a culture of generations that is innovative and curious about, and having the mindset to change the world, to have an impact, social impact, or an impact to billions of people around the world, of course, starting locally at home. One of the panelists here today is, sorry, I have a feeling my mic is going in and out. Sorry if I'm pronouncing. And I wanted to take the time and actually ask questions. Prior to coming here today, I took the time to look at his background, and it was pretty impressive that someone of his age and background has been so successful in the startup arena. He started a company back in 2000, beginning of 2000, and he bootstrapped his own startup. And eventually, he had a very successful exit. The name of the company is Viki, and some of you might be familiar with that. And eventually, that company was acquired by Rakuten. I wanted to talk to you and ask you, what is, from your perspective, being a successful entrepreneur, and highlighting the point there that you didn't really utilize external financing. You bootstrapped your company. That's a really powerful and brave endeavor. What was that experience for you, and what advice could you give aspiring entrepreneurs now looking back as someone who's traveled that journey? Also now you're involved in activities related to social impact. So if you can talk about your experience and lessons learned, and again, what could you tell yourself, if you could, 5 years ago, right? What advice would you give to an aspiring entrepreneur sitting in your shoes?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? So I wish there was a formula, but I'll handle that maybe in reverse. I started with the social impact side first, because a lot of entrepreneurs say, let me go out, build something. If I have an exit, then I'll get to the social side. And right out of grad school, this was at Stanford in around 2005 and 6, the first startup was called Embrace, which is essentially a $25 premature infant incubator. And our challenge in mechanical engineering and design classes was incubators are $20,000. 4 million low birth weight babies are dying every year because they're in villages. Can you build one for $25? So we built it, we patented it, we took that to market. It took us 5 years, but we thought we can do it in 6 months, but it took 5 years because it was a medical device. But it was phenomenal to be able to work on something that, that the sooner you get it to market, it's going to impact lives. So from Embrace, I was working on an idea called MViki, and what Viki essentially is a global version of Netflix or Hulu. But the innovation behind it was we had a community of 200,000 people. It's a play on video on Wikipedia where they were creating subtitles in 200 languages, including languages that are getting lost pretty soon. So with that kind of an innovation, you start opening up the borders for content. You can take a show from Egypt and put French on it, open up France. You take a Korean drama, put Arabic on it, open up the Middle East. So we started creating a market. When I realized as a startup, a lot of entrepreneurs are looking for a market to go into or a market that can be large enough. And the big lesson learned for us by looking at data was like, sometimes you have to create the market. You're building for a market that you're also creating. And that gives you an edge because you are ahead in it and you can look at the data and see what you can map. So there was no formula for us. The difficult part was at that point, I was in Singapore when we were building Viki. Even though we had raised money in the US and the Valley from Greylock and Andreessen Horowitz and others, being in Singapore was tough. Like to be able to raise another round from there, a Series B and a C were very tough. The good news, and perhaps this ties to Armenia, was the government of Singapore was super supportive. To have an ecosystem that helps entrepreneurs, typically you need capital, you need a large market, and you need a lot of talent. Singapore is tiny. It's not a big market to work in. It doesn't have a lot of talent pool, but it has capital. So the government, they're focused on capital. Even if you raised $15,000, they would match it with another 85 on top of it. And they made visas very, very easy. I'm struggling here with my third startup getting engineers from abroad. It takes a year to wait on an H-1 visa if you're lucky in the lottery. In Singapore, we got it in 1 week. I built a team of 40 engineers very, very quickly, talented from Facebook, Google, everywhere. We would fly them to Singapore, we would get a visa right away. And we had a huge advantage. So that ended up being an advantage of getting engineers there. And what was interesting about Singapore, perhaps also this ties to the Armenian ecosystem, and to startups looking at building out of there or working with Armenia. Singapore's mindset was really interesting. It wasn't building in Singapore or made in Singapore, it was made with Singapore. So they didn't mind being a pass-through. So it didn't have to have the stamp on it saying that this was made in Singapore, so long as Singapore was involved. So in that case, like we were sitting in a very tiny market building from there, but we were reaching the entire world. So Viki's audience, by the time we exited the Rakuten, we had about 25 million users on a monthly basis, but a fraction of a 1% was in Singapore. So lesson learned was it's okay to hide, tuck away somewhere else where you have a competitive advantage. It's okay to go in a market that might not be that large, but you got to be relentless. Startups are win or die. It's the hardest thing I had done. I'm doing another one again now. I don't know why, but it's pretty invigorating. I'm now on the board of Rakuten as well, which is the Amazon of Japan. I have the privilege of seeing a lot of startups around the world, so I do a lot of M&A, but I'm starting to invest, and with Graph Ventures that I'm listed with, I was one of the early investors in PixArt, in SolarLearn, to Armenian great startups, and I'm excited. I keep going yearly to Armenia to see what the talent pool looks like and see how we can turn that into a vibrant community for startups and the entire ecosystem there.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. One quick last question. So obviously, success comes with great responsibilities and expectations. You have shifted, or you are actually doing this simultaneously, but you have your focus now on building a social impact. Is that important, and why is it in today's global world where we're facing a lot of challenges like global warming and, I mean, a lot of challenges that are ahead of us and ahead of those generations? What can we as entrepreneurs, as government officials, as pillars for, for these incredible innovative entrepreneurs that are out there, what can we do, and why is important to have a social impact in mind?
I don't know, maybe it's a philosophical question, but I grew up in a small Armenian community in Egypt. There was 2,000 of us, and we all knew each other. My parents were both what you would call social activists, and I grew up with a global mindset that it's important to give more than take. And maybe as a father of two right now, I think my priority is to be a good father. The things I want to work on, I first have to think that it's important before it's big. If it's important and big, that's great. It creates a great opportunity, but the formula for me is that. And after the exit, I realized after the first exit and the second exit, the stuff that made me happy before are the same things that make me happy. Little things, like playing soccer, spending time on things I like, and perhaps I view it as there is infinity before this moment. There's this moment, and then there's infinity again. So I think every moment that you build something, it better matter. And that's why I started with the social impact project before the for-profit one, the non-profit before for-profit, rather than reversing it. But I like it. Time is the most precious resource I think anyone has, especially when you're building a team and you want them to be very mission-driven. You don't want this to be a job for them, because if it's a job for them, at some point they're going to leave. You want ownership. You want them to be driven by it. So if you build a culture like that, you build teams like that, automatically you're focused on things that matter for them. And if there's a social element to the startup, I think that's really important. So the third one, our Ripple, it's about untold stories and sort of global untold stories, stuff you don't see on CNN and BBC. And I think there are so many unheard voices out there that's important to amplify those and put light on them.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed those highlights, and certainly very proud to have you join the panel today. We're continuing on with another very exciting person. I know Max personally, and I'm honored to be moderating the discussion with him today. Max GURVITS, it's a current director of Cross-Border Angels. It's an early seed, angel investor fund that is looking globally to assist global, entrepreneurs and startups. And Max certainly comes with a long resume of success in the entrepreneurial world, successful entrepreneur himself, a mentor, an advisor, an investor, a long list following him. So Max, what I'd like to do today is if you can give us a few highlights of your background, and also at the end, from your perspective as an investor now, someone who is more focused on helping companies early on, companies that have traction perhaps, or MVP, or they not only have a vision, but they have something in hand. What are the most important lessons from your perspectives, coming out of, the perspective of an entrepreneur, but now being an angel investor? Why is money important to the startup ecosystem? Why do startups need money?
That's a very good question. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me here. I've been very fortunate to be involved both with Bulgaria and to a lesser extent with Armenia. Right. Although I'm originally not from either country. I was born in Moscow, grew up here in the US, then in the Netherlands, spent most of my life there. And then life kind of brought me to Bulgaria after my first company. And the plan was to actually start a new one, do it out of Bulgaria, because I was really impressed with the community there, the opportunities on the ground. But then it just so happened that I ended up on a team that was raising a venture capital fund, a small seed fund. We're actually small by US standards. We were at that time the largest in Europe, a 12 million euro seed fund with EU backing. And we launched an accelerator program. And as part of the marketing of that accelerator program, so one of the problems we had was that our fund was basically way too big for Bulgaria, but we had this legal constraint that we could only invest in Bulgaria, right? So we started looking outside Bulgaria. We started looking at the region, right? So we went to neighboring countries, which, the Balkans, Serbia, Romania, Croatia, and many other small countries in that region. But one of the things we did was we started working with several corporations in understanding better what is happening across the region. And one of those corporations was Microsoft. And at some point, they invited us over to Yerevan for an event. Microsoft was just starting up many of you guys know that organization, the Microsoft Innovation Center in Yerevan, which was at that time one of the first ones. I just heard a couple of weeks ago that there are dozens of them all over the world right now, but Yerevan was one of the first 3 Microsoft Innovation Centers back in 2012. So I visited Yerevan and didn't really expect anything. Was pleasantly surprised that it actually looked a lot like Bulgaria. It's probably visually one of the most similar places to Bulgaria. Mountains, very similar kind of Ottoman-inspired, architecture and the way streets are built and everything. So that is very, very recognizable from the same history as Bulgaria. And what I did find was an incredible community in Armenia. So. For the country of its size, of course, and its location in the world, it's an absolutely incredible, outstanding place. Facing very much the same challenges as we see in other places that have been part of the Soviet system previously. There was an incredible, flight of human capital. At the same time, Armenia, of course, is extremely lucky that it has so many people outside Armenia that are of Armenian heritage and that are giving back. So, for instance, basically, I was very lucky to be a part of this kind of startup venture ecosystem building movement in Eastern Europe pretty early on, or at least before the big wave started happening in the last couple of years. So right now I get asked very often as like, people invite me to places like Ukraine, Belarus, Baltics, many countries to tell them how, what are your experiences? How can we actually replicate Bulgaria's success? Because for what it's worth, Bulgaria is considered a success story when it comes to launching venture ecosystems in Eastern Europe. And one of the examples that I always give, I always tell, in Bulgaria we were lucky with some things, also many things we didn't do right, and many things we didn't manage to do in Bulgaria. And I hope we will manage, or people actually that came after me, because I'm less involved with Bulgaria now myself, will manage to do. But one of the examples I always give is Armenia, and specifically the TUMO Center. Now, the TUMO Center in Yerevan is absolutely the most incredible thing I've ever seen, right? It is, the contrast between what's happening in the country, or like generally in the streets, which is nothing bad, but it's also nothing, particularly extremely good. And then you get in there and you see these hundreds of kids every single day learning technology, learning, the cutting edge stuff. There's, many of you have been there, right? It's robotics labs, game design labs, top-notch technology. And I was thinking to myself that, I think the kids in any Eastern European country would be extremely lucky if they had that kind of opportunity as Armenian kids do. So I think that 20 years from now, and this kind of actually what makes me the most optimistic about Armenia, I think that probably 15, 20 years from now, when the generation of kids that grew up in the TUMO Center, when they will start hitting, the entrepreneurship field, the job market, that's when you will see that Armenia, this whole premise that Armenia is kind of very similar to Israel, that's probably where we'll see how that will, start getting into life. So that's my involvement with Armenia. Now, getting back to your question regarding money, why is it important? Of course, money is one of the components of business, together with human capital. In Europe, of course, and I consider Armenia obviously part of Europe, although geographically it's right on the edge there. In Europe, money, of course, works differently than in the US. One of the biggest problems in Europe, and we've seen this in many other Eastern European countries as well, is that money on itself doesn't really solve problems. They're the biggest lack that we have, especially in early stage venture in that part of the world, is human capital. Especially the skills, not the technical skills. Now, we all know that Armenia has great technical skills, but we also know that Bulgaria has great technical skills. And Ukraine is a famed outsourcing destination, and Belarusian engineers are extremely good. And basically, wherever you go, wherever there was fundamental scientific education back in the day, there is still very good engineering. The problem, however, and that's a big problem, is that business skills, if we talk about product, marketing, sales, basically business development as a whole, all of that stuff is either very underdeveloped or it exists in ways that are actually counterproductive to startups or to technology companies, right? So this is something I've seen a lot in Bulgaria, where people actually have business experience, but it actually hampers them in building startups, because the way business is done in a place like Bulgaria, for what it's worth, some of it is really good, but it very often is not compatible with the way you would like to globally business develop. And I think that one of the problems that we should be addressing, I hope we are addressing, as the investor or the advisor community, is bringing in those skills into the market. So, for instance, all these events now, I'm really, I should say, positively surprised in a really, really good way that last time I don't live in Silicon Valley. I'm actually based out of Bulgaria, but I travel the world all the time. And the last time I was in this part of the world, in the Bay Area, I was also invited to an Armenian conference, which was high tech in Berkeley in April. So it's really cool to see that every time I'm here, there's actually an Armenian event or an Armenia themed event happening. So that means that this is actually really important, guys, right? Because if this actually keeps happening once or twice or three times a year, then at a certain point, again, you will reach this inflection point where enough Armenian entrepreneurs or people that want to do startups in Armenia. I already saw a couple of faces in the room. I see Aram over there and a couple of other Armenian entrepreneurs that I know that I've met in Armenia. The more these people get access to what is happening here, the more that learning will happen. And if anything, I think that capital should actually be a large part of the early stage venture capital is to finance that kind of learning, right? So when you look at Silicon Valley, there was this whole paradigm, which was, I think, first awarded by Mark Suster from Frontline Ventures in LA, where he said, there is learning money and there is earning money, right? So we want to invest in startups that don't learn but that actually earn. That's a very Silicon Valley way of looking at things. I think that when you look at places like Armenia, notwithstanding the fact that there are really successful companies every now and then coming out of there, the biggest thing you can do, the strongest way you can actually push the needle is in financing that learning, right? So if you get more people, really smart people, get them exposed to learning opportunities by bringing that knowledge over there, but also by helping some of them come over here and learn for a while. That's really what capital can really do. So it's much less about this hiring kind of logic that you have in Silicon Valley, that you need to get money to hire the best talent. There, it's really about more of a longer term play. And it's very diverse, right? So some companies, you really have to help them get out of there. So, for instance, with our fund, what we ended up doing in Armenia, we actually invested in one Armenian company, and they were very, very promising for a while. They unfortunately did shut down after that. But there, for instance, the whole trick was that we needed to leverage both the opportunity to do the engineering in Armenia, but at the same time get them business development acumen and knowledge from outside Armenia, also outside Bulgaria, because obviously in Bulgaria we're not much better, if at all, than Armenia. So that's that. So capital is tricky when it comes to places like Armenia, but and it's a longer term game, right? So I think that I know that some people are really critical about the pace of stuff in Armenia, but I think that 20 years from now we'll see an amazing place, totally leapfrogged.
Great. You touched on a few very important things I want to highlight that I had on my list. To summarize, so basically some of the most important key factors to build a successful entrepreneur ecosystem, startup system in Armenia or any parts of the world is to have not only, the venture capital or access to money, but also the mentality of, having the education and the mentality to support these entrepreneurs through mentorships, through sharing experience. A lot of global markets are trying to replicate Silicon Valley success, and some are more successful than others. But at the end of the day, it's about having a combination of these factors and the support system. We already talked about the infrastructure. We already talked about being able to have that mindset, the culture of innovating and having the social aspect. But yeah, money is definitely part of it, but not everything. So thank you for that. One quick last question for you. I know time is, we have a few more panelists, but I promise you it's getting really interesting. So please stick with us for a few more minutes. So as an investor, what do you look for in entrepreneurs? Like, how do you make a decision? Obviously, there's got to be, the idea, the whole picture, the team. But what are the top 3 things that you look in a startup before making a decision to invest in them? If you can share that with the audience.
Just very quickly. I mean, it really depends on your mandate. So just to kind of slightly correct my job description right now, with Cross-Border Angels, we're an angel network, so we're not a fund. Okay. We do syndicate. We have over 70 members. We do about a deal a month, now getting to about 2 deals a month. We're completely location agnostic, so we haven't done deals in Armenia yet. I hope we will at some point. We have a very strong base in India. We do a lot of stuff in the US, in Europe, in Middle East, other places. But we're not a fund. So right now what I'm doing with Cross-Border, we're actually looking for companies that are early stage, but already have revenues, or at least some kind of revenue validation. And what I personally look for a lot, and this is kind of my development as an investor, because before that I used to do a seed fund and I did a couple of angel investments myself. What we look for are people that, we're looking for companies that are not chasing the hype, right? So, we're not looking for moonshot. I don't believe that outside, I don't know if this actually works. It's on and off. I think that outside Silicon Valley, it's really hard to do the kind of moonshot technologies that are very capital intensive, very skill intensive. But what you do see in places like, Eastern Europe, Armenia, countries in that region, is you see a lot of people building relatively successful, very promising niche products, right? Software as a service that takes a whole industry, like the vet industry, for instance. I'm just thinking of a specific example right now online, right? Those companies actually do really well, and you see more and more of these smaller niche companies in places like Armenia, getting to a valuation of, let's say, anywhere between $20 and $100 million and getting acquired. And we see those stories all the time, and that's the kind of companies we're looking at when it comes to that region. So nothing very flashy. Very often it's kind of boring in a way, but that's what a business is all about. So
Great.
that's me.
Well, thank you. Thanks
you.
for sharing your experience.
Can we ask questions?
Can we save the questions to the end? I'd like to give a chance to the rest of the panelists. Thank you if you could save that. Next panelist is SEDRAK Sargisyan.
Yes.
Thank you for being here today. Very honored to be in your company. Mr. Sargisyan is a Development Engineering Director at Mentor Graphics. And Mentor Graphics, it's a technology leader in electronic design automation. I would let you share some of your, some highlights of your experience, but mostly I want to focus the discussion. If you could, as an engineer and a technology expert or executive with for a technology company, what best practices could you share with global entrepreneurs? You're Armenian yourself, and you have worked in the local, with local companies, and you have established your presence here in Silicon Valley. What would you say are the most important aspects of, either is it the business culture, is it the technology background, is it the design when you're designing a product? Of course, that's part of the technology, but from your perspective as a technology executive, what lessons or what advice would you give aspiring Armenian entrepreneurs who want to bring their companies here to the U.S. and those who are willing to stay there and continue building the ecosystem? So two-parts question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll try to answer. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you very much, Synopsys. Especially since it's our competitor, we like competitors.
Partnership.
Actually, it's vice versa. For me, it's really an interesting story, which I'd like to share. We have continuous life, but in this life there are some discrete events that have very, very big impact. And for me, there was one specific event that had very big impact on myself, on my future life, as well as not only on my life, but that was, I think, in '93 when I first met with Tony Moroyan, who at that time was senior marketing director at Hitachi. And Tony had a vision, and his vision was to do something in Armenia. Maybe not so clear vision, but he had a vision. He wanted to do startups, and he had a startup. So I joined his startup. I moved to initially Moscow, and then I moved to Texas. That was in '93. And that startup was not particularly successful, but it depends how you're going to manage the success, and I'll expand on it. In 1998, I was working in EDA company called Compass Design Automation. And we knew that we can do something much, much better, but we were unable to do it in that particular company. So my boss left the company. They founded a startup called Aristo Technology, and I was one of the 4 employees. And being there, we wanted to establish presence in Armenia. And one reason, well, first of all, I'm Armenian, I wanted to help. But the second reason, we knew that there is a talent. Definitely, there is a talent that is not easy to find. And that talent, if you can find it and you can utilize it, that's already great. So we started a company in Armenia, startup, owned by Aristo, called Arset. Okay, so, and you never know when you start a startup what is going to happen. Of course, you hope for merger, acquisition, IPO, et cetera, et cetera. In our case, that startup got acquired by Monterey Design. I think that happened in 2001. And guess what? In 2004, that startup got acquired by Synopsys. Very interesting.
Small world.
Small world. Then in 2008, we started our company called Ponte Design Automation, and that was in Silicon Valley. And again, in Actually, not in, I'm sorry, yeah, in 2008. And then four years later, I'm sorry, not 4 years later, I don't remember the numbers, but eventually it got acquired by Mentor Design. So, so if you track it back, thanks to Tony, now we have 2 EDA companies established in Armenia. And then today I found one of our former interns here in this room who told me that he has a startup. Wonderful. So the culture of startups is really, really new in Armenia. And I have to admit that many people have very little knowledge about what startups are about. When I joined several startups, I had much better offers financially, but we really had a dream. We had a dream to build something new. And that new is not necessarily only the product, because when you build something from scratch, you build completely new culture. You have freedom. You have an opportunity to wear multiple hats. You can be engineering manager, you can be application engineer, you can be the salesman, and sometimes you are forced to do it, right, all together. And I have to admit that looking back, it was much, much harder, very difficult to do business in Armenia. For example, we talked about infrastructure. I regret that the government representatives are not here, but you know, we literally had no internet that was working. So we had to bring satellite antenna from Israel, put it on top of our building to have our own internet connection. That was quite expensive, very difficult to maintain, but we did it. And when we went to the prime minister, telling, you know, the problem is a monopoly because you gave monopolistic right to some Greek company who was not really good one. And the answer was no. You are the guilty person. I said, why? Because you don't do enough to work with the US government because there is a hub in Turkey. And if you put the pressure on the US government put pressure on Turkey, they will let us to use that hub. Luckily, the government is getting better, and we see this success story, which is really, really outstanding success story, right? So you break the monopoly, immediately you get the results. Now, internet that I have, thanks to UCOM, in my apartment in Armenia is maybe even better than what I have here in the US, and it's really affordable. Aram Salatyan, which I respect very, very much for his also wonderful presentations, in one of his presentations clearly defined what you need to have to build this ecosystem for global startups. Essentially, you need good schools, you need industry, you need market, you need some help from the government, and of course, you need the access to venture funding. And if those 5 components start looking really, really well, we can see something like what we have in Silicon Valley, or maybe even more successful example in terms of the startups that what we have in Israel. I was really, really fascinated by what they have in Israel. So there are examples that we have to look at those examples. And what I can say is that we are doing our baby steps in establishing startups in Armenia that clearly, PixArt is a fantastic example. So we're at the same building. We're on the 5th floor of Tumo Center. They're on the 3rd floor. It's a really good example. And I'm pretty sure there'll be many, many more. So my advice, I can see that even some of our ex-employees who work at Google's, Facebook's, you name it, every company here, I advocate them to look at opportunities in Armenia. Nowadays, it's much, much easier to do business there. Do your startups. If you cannot do startups, try to establish presence through your companies in Armenia. Try to help them. And I see exciting opportunities there. So one more time, it's very important to know that startup, well, it's fun. It's a lot of fun, but it's also incredibly hard work. I had to work every Saturday, every Sunday. I have to work till 1 a.m. for years. And I had to go for significant salary cuts. And guess what? A couple of times, my employees in Armenia left for startups for better salaries. So this is incredible, and I would like to actually raise this as a concern. It is very important to, not to corrupt those young kids. Sell them the idea. Tell them what startups are about. I mean, you can have so much freedom in startup. You can innovate. You can create new culture. You can create new development process. You name it. But initially, it's not about the money. So all the companies who are mainly from, either Europe or the US, of course, they have lots of money and they go and try to buy talent no matter what. That's not a good practice. So I would strongly advise against that. Instead, advocate what the real values of startup are. What is, the light at the end of the tunnel. And honestly, I don't know. For here, of course, if you join as one of the first employees at startups, you have some shares. I don't know if anything like that exists in Armenia. If the startup is initiated in Armenia, I don't know if they're working for, shares. If they want, I really don't know. I have no idea. So as I mentioned, there is progress. Particularly, we have some venture funds now. I know Granatus, et cetera, et cetera. When you have a startup, it's very important to have an access to good advisors. And here, we're blessed. In Armenia, there are now advisors. You can find advisors. I understand that there are also organizations that help entrepreneurs. So SEED is one of them, who is one of the organizers. Yes. So thank you very much. Still, there is not enough supply of good qualified specialists. Not enough. So there is so much demand. And I'm receiving resumes from Egypt, from India, and honestly, I'm considering maybe we should start hiring. Why not? I'm serious. And I don't know about the regulation, how easy it would be to obtain work permits, etc. And we also need definitely to invest in education. We have 20 interns working literally full-time, and that is the only way for me right now to hire. I have a position, okay, who is a best intern I can hire? We hire.
Well, thank you for sharing your experience, and I really appreciate the comment you made about, the fact that all of us pretty much, I'm pretty sure that every single person in this room has an international background, either as, Armenian or Bulgarian or Russian or, and it's really important as we grow and as we take a different stage in our lives to give back to the communities where it all started. So I really appreciate the comment of you saying, it needs to be a bridge and there has to be this connection and interaction and exchange of ideas and values, sharing experience that we all have earned here in the Valley or throughout the United States and other part of the world, and bring it back to the local community where it all started. So thank you for that. Our next panelist is RAZMIK ABNOUS, hopefully pronouncing your name correctly, who is a CTO and a co-founder of Petruvian Networks. Thank you for being here today. Really honored to have you on our panel. What I wanted to talk about with you today is obviously you have a pretty impressive background in product development. You're one of the founding members of the Documentum platform, and you also have an experience as an investor yourself. What some of the questions that I asked to some of the previous panelists, but what are the success factors for technology entrepreneurs? And, of course, after sharing some of your highlights of your background, how would you advise, aspiring entrepreneurs from Armenia, what should they focus on as they get as they start looking at entering new markets and expanding or scaling their business, looking for fund outside of the local market?
Okay. First of all, thanks for this opportunity. First of all, just a few minutes about my background. I am, first of all, two RAZMIKs on the same panel with a G and a K. So I'm going to let you guys figure out the difference. But one of the things that's common is the social impact, which I'm going to come back and talk about that towards the end.
Great.
But my background, again, I am a computer science person. I've done 3 startups in my career. 1 big success, 1 failure, I'll be very honest. This one looks very promising. So, but it's in the beginning days. But sort of the common roots of the 2 of them goes back into social impact that RAZMIK talked about. So Documentum was essentially a document management company. Probably after IBM was the 2nd largest document management company in the world, but it was focused on the regulated markets, pharmaceutical, construction markets, banking, and so on. But again, the company started in 91, and then we sort of grew the company, eventually IPO'd and sold to EMC for $1.8 billion. But it's a large-sized company with $800 million revenue. But what made Documentum successful is a core team of 5 people, 8 people actually, in the first 2 years, that really built the initial product for a specific market that the customer wanted that product. And it was not a large team. 8 people, really 6 engineers and 2 sales and marketing. What that team created, and essentially I call it the way the team was openly discussing how to develop the product, is what made the company what it was. But also, I think another lesson from Documentum is sort of the culture that was embedded in the company by the founders and the CEO of the company, the first CEO of the company. That was, we had 2 themes. Open, honest communication, and also, we know where we're going. We may be wrong, but we're not confused. So I think that that those 2 themes was a overarching thing to everything I did from there on. But then sort of another consistent theme for me has been persistent. You have to be persistent in what you're doing. So even though Documentum was successful, it's important to realize it took us 3 years, close to 4 years, to get to the first correct market fit. Everybody knows us for pharmaceutical being our success factor, but it's literally a 4-year from 91 to 94 before we hit the right market fit. So to me, startup 4 years, it's a long time. Now, and then I would say after Documentum was a company called Samba Cloud, which was, I was trying to re-innovate Documentum. But I think, again, it was a failure. There was a great technology, but lesson learned, I was too late to the market. So everybody knows Box. So I was 3 years after Box to market, which is too late. So even though I had a bare idea, the investors didn't care, to be honest with you, even though I had all the credentials to do it right. This one, Vitruvian Network, is sort of it's not document management. It's sort of the new generation of, it's all about the moonshot, to be close to it. It's about cancer therapy. It's a platform that is designed to expedite the cancer therapy manufacturing. So a lot of the new generation of cancer therapy, it's all in precision medicine, space called cell therapy. So what we're building is a platform that it's software, bioinformatics, and new generation of data analytics to expedite the commercialization. And again, the same thing, if I look at the Vitruvian Network, it is a company funded by GE Venture and Mayo Clinic, but GE has recognized that even though they need to do this, they cannot do this at GE because wrong DNA, too big of a company, they see the opportunity, but they know they're too slow to innovate in this space. That's why they brought, again, 5 people. So if you look at the Vitruvian Network, you think there's an army of people behind it. It's actually 5 people that actually are working on the sort of a large-scale project. But I want to go back to the 2 commonality is a core team, handful of people, both Documentum and Vitruvian Network, that you have to be experienced, but not too much, to be honest with you, because too much experience sort of has a negative effect. but a core set of people that they actually are very homogeneous in the way they work together, they trust each other, and they're persistent, and they believe in something. But the other thing is, goes back into RAZMIK's point, where Documentum and Vitruvian has a common theme is social impact. So I think what made Documentum great is sort of that not only we had an ecosystem that within the product organization, the company sort of that made everybody move the same direction, but also our customers saw our mission, that we actually a company that we're trying to solve their problem. And we focused on really, I call it a real problem in pharmaceuticals, like what can we do to cure cancer? So I think you need to have a mission that you believe in and you're trying to do something about, and there's some kind of a reason for that company to move towards that. So I think that's sort of the common themes that sort of what I saw that actually is lessons learned that I'm trying to applying it to Armenia. So going back to Armenia, how I've been involved. First is I was born in Iran. Again, in the Soviet days, I always look across the border and say, when can I cross that border? This is like in my 19, in 1974, 75. And we said, we're never gonna see the independent Armenia. So anyway, I come to US, 1991, started Documentum. Within 6 months in San Francisco, the Armenian community asked me, hey, why don't you go to Armenia and figure out what you can do to digitize maternal care in Armenia. So I went with a team of 3 people to sort of look at what does it take to digitize maternal care. We came up with the system and all of that. And everybody knows there were electrical problems in Armenia, right? The economy collapsed. So even though we had a great idea, people said, you know, there's no electricity. So doing a computer system for maternal care is impossible, so stop. So I think it wasn't until 1999 that USAID, US government said, hey, the high-tech community in Armenia, they need to do something about Armenia's high-tech industry. So they really formed, I would say, 20 of us in Boston. It was Tony, me, it was Nuba Rafeyan, Sam Simonian, Berj Ayvazian. I think there was like 20 of us that sort of became the nucleus of what it came to sort of build an ecosystem to sort of what can we do to improve Armenia's IT opportunities. I think as I started exploring what's there and looking at the people, I mean, I sort of came across Bagrat Yegabarian, I came across Hovane Savoyan. I got to know a lot of people, and I think that ecosystem that we built sort of went from diaspora to Armenia. So to me, it sort of became pretty important. And I think we've been persistent to keep growing that. But to me, going back into what do I see as the challenges to make this grow? So I would say, I still think the #1 issue to me is education. So I think education in Armenia, we are challenged. We are challenged in the way that Armenia IT is limited today because everybody's almost employed. That's a great thing. But if, say, Google wants to go to Armenia, hire 500 people, impossible. So I think what we need to do is sort of not education, but the right education for the market opportunity. So to me, if you look at the market opportunity, if you look at the high-tech landscape, what is relevant? Everybody talks about artificial intelligence, blockchain, cybersecurity, design. If you look at all of this, it sort of boils down to 2 things. Math meets computer science, design meets computer science. So if I look at it, go back to as important as chess to Armenians, we need to go back to the elementary school, and we need to start teaching the confluence of math and computer science, design and art meets computer science. So that's why I'm so excited with what Tumo is doing, but I think we need to sort of, from the elementary school up, start looking at this as important as chess to our educational system. Because I think, yes, the universities have challenges, but we need to start a lot earlier for this to be successful for the next generation.
Thank you. That's very important. Again, it touches on one of the main components of this whole, the point of discussing what does it take to build a successful infrastructure and drawing a parallel between Silicon Valley and Armenia so that, there could be actionable lessons, takeaways from these lessons learned is I mean, education is one of the most important components, and thank you for drawing parallel on that. And I see that not only in Armenia, I mean, I see it in Bulgaria. Definitely, education needs to be disrupted, not only, it's being disrupted in the US, but it's part of the innovation movement globally. And definitely, for those of you in the audience, there are entrepreneurs thinking about the next great idea. You just got a free tip here. Think about a way to disrupt education and make it more applicable to meet the challenges of the global world and the technology innovations. Since time is, we're running a little bit over our allotted time, I would like to thank you for your participation and move on to our last panelist, Maria Adamian, who is a founding partner of Ecom. Thank you for your patience, and this was not by design to be the woman, to be the last one on the panel, I promise you. So Maria, tell us about a little bit about your background. You have a lot of passions. You've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs and startups in a different capacity. You've participated in various. You've worked at a Founders Institute, at Incubator. Now you're at Ecom. Tell us, share some of the highlights of your background, and what do you think will it take for entrepreneurs to succeed in Armenia? What do you see the government or the ecosystem there? What kind of support do you think entrepreneurs need in order to succeed in Armenia? And also, as they look beyond the local and the regional borders, what do you think it's important to keep in mind?
Thank you. It is interesting that RAZMIG mentioned Iranian border. That's actually where I was born back in '75, so we were looking somewhere in the direction where I was being born in Migri. But I did grow up in Russia, and as a matter of kind of disclaimer, although I'm ethnically Armenian and my ties with Armenia are very strong, I have never actually done business in Armenian. So now that I successfully destroyed my credibility in this matter, I'd like to rebuild it a little bit. For the past many years, I've been working in both public and private organizations in Russia and the States, focusing on building startup communities, focusing on entrepreneurship education, and on infrastructure to support tech startups. Most organizations I worked for were private, but oftentimes in Russia, I would say that more than half of the projects I carried out were financed in part or in full by federal or municipal budgets. For example, in Moscow, I authored and launched the acceleration and co-working space called API Moscow in the former Red October factory in the center of Moscow. That was done for the Moscow city government for their technology program, and Russian-wide startup competition called Generation S, as in startup. Was supported by tech companies, but it was financed and still is financed by the development institutes, first and foremost Russian venture companies. So I worked with the state infrastructure in Russia a lot in the past years. A couple of years ago, I moved to Silicon Valley. I worked with the Founder Institute on designing and launching their Silicon Valley Immersion program for the alumni startups. Now, this is an accelerator for very early stage companies, like idea to prototype. But their alumni, like founders who went through the program some years ago. Some of them have very good, solid revenue-generating companies located in Malaysia, in Barcelona, all over the world. And of course, they're looking to Silicon Valley, as the rest of the world is, for business development and for fundraising. So that program was for them. And then I moved on together with my partner to establishing a consulting company. We've worked specifically with international startups who are expanding to the United States or who are launching their product in the United States. So I believe that my experience specifically in this past couple of years is very relevant to Armenian founders, and I know quite a lot of them, and I talk to them all the time. And I think that the challenges that they're facing here, trying to find soft landing in the U.S. market, they are pretty much the same as most foreign startups, foreign founders face coming to the United States. I don't know if we have time for the slide, but if not, I'll just kind of go through the points. Recently at the high-tech event in April, Nurses Ohanian asked me a question that sets a very good, perfect framework for discussing startups coming to the U.S. He asked me, what are the questions that startups ask you before coming here, and what are the questions that they should be asking? And there is this almost 100% gap between these two problems, because what they are asking, their requests are mostly how to establish sales here, to find salespeople, find and hire CMO for the startup, so that the company that's based somewhere, be that Russia, Ukraine, or Uruguay. We worked with a lot of different countries. They will just rely on the marketing officer here to establish sales and marketing. And of course, third huge topic is fundraising. They want to raise money in the Valley to continue doing business somewhere and enter the U.S. market. And the fact of the matter is that most startups are not ready for any of this. They shouldn't be focusing on the sales or marketing, but instead they should be getting their product ready for this market. In most cases, product is not localized properly. And I'm not talking only about the language. I'm also talking about features that are relevant to this market. So the product market fit is not there. There's been no customer development, so they don't really know what the feedback would be to their product. B2C, B2B, all over the board. The pitches are not there, but that's universal. And the fundraising is a whole entirely separate topic in itself. It breaks my heart to see time and time again when founders spend their very scarce financing to come to the Valley with the sole purpose to raise funds, only to be told again and again that the VCs, angels could be more lenient, but VCs are not considering you, not taking you seriously until you and some of the key decision makers from your startup move to the area. And I was told even by founders in San Diego that they have the same objection from VC firms here, that San Diego is too far, you have to be close. And this is a very simple problem. It's not simple to solve, but it would be great to be aware of this problem before you actually come to the States. So if going to tie this back into the role of ecosystem and maybe some possible solutions, if I allowed myself to fantasize a little bit and to dream a little bit, it would be I'm imagining that it would be wonderful to have some sort of home base here, to establish a home base for Armenian founders, to make it easy for them to find a place for a short stay, like co-living, co-working in the Valley or in the city. A place where we could host events, because hosting an event gives you huge, huge leg. It just makes it so much easier for you to network rather than being a guest at some event that you don't know. Helping second point would be like helping them, helping founders design the funding strategy before they come here would be immensely helpful. And that includes, working on short list of investors to approach, reaching out to angel investors. In most cases, angels are more open to invest overseas. To take this a step further, it would be great to have a financial instrument, sort of like a bridge financing, to invest in solid startups, from Armenia to help them transition, to international markets, and then raise financing wherever they have the biggest traction. Another huge topic is, of course, pitches and public speaking. RAZMIG talked about, teaching the need to teach children early to, for math and coding skills and, tech skills. My 8-year-old daughter here goes to a public school, and she already has classes in public speaking. And that's hugely important because it is a skill. It can be taught. It's not, something out of the ordinary. It can be taught. But the earlier you start, the easier you feel yourself, the more confident you are. And pitching is just that. It's just a skill. And also a problem that I hear, from Armenian founders and others is the challenge to find mentors and co-founders in the States. And I've never seen this actually solved successfully by any of the existing instruments like Co-Founders Lab. I mean, some organizations are attempting to do this, but I've never seen it done successfully. But it doesn't mean that it's impossible to do. And if there is an agency that has this mission, I can imagine that there will be people here, like students at prominent colleges here, who will be willing to try being, for example, a business development co-founder to a techie founder in Armenia, and that will make matters so much easier for the Armenian startup. So, of course, due to my background, I mostly deal with startups that are trying to put the foot in the door here in the States, so I cannot really talk about the Armenian ecosystem. But I know that some good and bad practices from other places.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your experience. And just to kind of quickly summarize, this was actually a great segue to ending the panel discussion. You heard from some incredibly intelligent and successful entrepreneurs, established businessmen and women, and also investors who have been responsible for building the ecosystem, the startup ecosystem in Armenia, as well as in the US. And just a quick summary, basically, what are the important aspects and what are the important pillars of success for having a successful entrepreneurship culture and having a successful ecosystem? Well, we talked about starting with the infrastructure, we need the capital, the education most definitely, the synergy between government and local policies, and innovation. I mean, all of these together, along with the talent and the resources. And to send you, this is the message that I want to give to all of you, as we have representatives of government and policymakers in Armenia, as well as entrepreneurs, business women and men. Take away those lessons and share the wealth of knowledge and experience, what you heard today from this panel and others, and spread the message that it's all about having the culture with a mindset to change the world and innovate. So thank you for being here today. I apologize for running late because we talked about these wonderful and gave you all these wonderful ideas. We're going to shorten your lunch, so I'm thinking about your, health. We're going to take 30 minutes break. Please do take the time to connect with some of the startups in the lunchroom, and we should be back around, the next panel is supposed to start around 1:45, so maybe a few minutes after that, Thank you so much. Hopefully you enjoyed this conversation.